Hey guys, today we are going to be talking about the 1980s. So going forward, we're going to be covering one decade at a time until the end of the school year, and you are going to be working with other people on creating a project. You're going to be talking about some different events that happened in each of these decades up until 2020. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with this incident that happened in 1985 in a place called Chernobyl. And you may have heard of this before, but Chernobyl was this nuclear power plant that was right here. And in 1985, there was a huge explosion, and this released a tremendous amount of radiation into the atmosphere. Okay, so you're probably thinking, well, that's a Soviet Union problem. That's not an everyone problem. But remember from when we talked about nuclear weapons that wind doesn't care about national borders. Right? Remember, in a nuclear reaction, radiation is released. And so what ended up happening was lots of people in Chernobyl were evacuated, but they were evacuated late, and a lot of them got sick and died. And the wind carried the radiation throughout Europe. So in a lot of these places, fruits and vegetables had to be destroyed. People were scared to buy unpackaged food and things like that. And it was a huge disaster. And it made people question the safety of nuclear energy. Well, keep in mind, too, that the Soviet Union, by this time, they're starting to run out of money, so they aren't able to run things safely. Okay, this was a huge event in the 1980s. Okay, science and technology. Let's talk about the cell phone. We all got one in our pocket, right? The ones that we got now, we can fit in the palm of our hand. Well, cell phones back in the 1980s were quite a bit bigger. Think about the size of a dictionary. Okay. So these cell phones were really expensive at the time, but people started buying more and more of them. The idea of being able to phone people anywhere in America was starting to take off, and so cell phones became more popular. And over time, they became cheaper and smaller, and they revolutionized the way that we communicate with each other. Right? So back in the 80s, it may have been that you could only use cell phones in the cities where the cell phone towers were. But now, I mean, it's 2020 and you can get cell phone service just about anywhere. So these cell phones really revolutionized the way that we communicate with each other today. Okay? The home computer. This is probably one of the most important inventions of the 20th century. Something like 85% of all Americans have a home computer in their home. You think about your Chrome. I mean, right now, you're on your device, you're on your laptop doing work for my class. Just think about back before then, everything had to be done on paper. Calculations took a long time to do, but now it can be done instantly. An interesting fact, your TI-80 whatever calculator that you use in Miss Miller's class has more computing power than the computers that were used on the rocket that took the first people to the moon. That's bananas, right? And now our cell phones have something like 10,000 times the capacity of those calculators. So as time goes on, scientists find ways to develop faster microchips, which allow your computers to have better graphics, communicate better, just faster processing power. And this has really revolutionized the way we process information in the 21st century. Human rights were still a big deal. So remember, in the late 1980s, communism starts collapsing in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, but those weren't the only communist countries in the world. China, the most populous country in the world, had been a communist country since the mid-1940s. And so some people in China started seeing the communist system as something that was old school and needed to go away. They didn't like having their rights violated. And in 1989, a group of students start protesting the Chinese government. They start demanding more and more rights. And so this is known as the Tiananmen Square Massacre. Now, Tiananmen Square is this area in central Beijing, which is the capital of China. And these students start protesting, demanding more and more rights. And this photo on the screen is a very famous photo. It's called Tank Man. And this guy was simply protesting against the Chinese government. He felt like the Chinese military had no right to prohibit, to violate their free speech. And he stood in front of these tanks. And this was an iconic image seen all over the world, that this guy was serious. He was willing to die to defend human rights versus an unfair, unjust government, something we've been talking about all year. Now, he does not die, but he does get arrested. The number of deaths during the Tiananmen Square Massacre, anywhere between 100 and 1,000 people. The Chinese government has kept that kind of secret. And in China today, it's illegal to talk about what happened at the Tiananmen Square Massacre. Okay. Finally, the Nintendo. Strange thing to be on the list, but it is social studies. It's history, right? Something like 60% of Americans own some kind of video game console, and this is where it all kicks off. Nintendo makes the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES. Over 65 million of these things are sold, and it starts this video game revolution. Okay, even today, a lot of you own video game systems or play video games on your phone of some sort. We play video games in class, like in Miss Harden's class or my class or Miss Womack's class. I mean, the predecessor was what Nintendo had done in the 1980s, creating this gaming revolution that still takes place today. Okay, so technology is changing the way we entertain ourselves as well. Now, a couple of things I wanted to show you. I wanted you to see the comparison between what life cost in the 1980s versus today. So today, the average income for a person, that's how much money they make in a year, is about $63,000. But in 1980, it was only $23,000. Okay, so this isn't because people were just poorer back then. It just meant that the value of your dollar was worth less. So as time, we call this inflation. So as time goes on, your dollar buys less and less stuff, which means you get paid more dollars. Okay, so we can see that it increased, the value of a dollar decreased by almost 300%. Right, the cost of a gallon of gas, and this one's an interesting one. So today it costs $1.87, but back then it cost $1.20. Now, right now in 2020, gas is quite cheap, and that is simply because, well, we're all in quarantine, we're all in lockdown. So fewer people are going out and buying gas. So remember when we talked about supply and demand? If demand for something is low, the price of it is low. And that's exactly what's happening here, okay? So as we do the 90s and the 2000s, you're going to see that the price of gas is actually more expensive in the last 20 years than it is today. The price of a movie ticket was $3, and today it's about $10. And any of you who've ever gone to a movie, you can say, you know, it's expensive, right? And finally, the cost of a computer. $1,250 in the 1980s because, well, it was a new technology. And as technologies become more popular, the price of those things go down, right? And so today it's about $400. All right, so what are you going to be doing? You're going to be working on a project with your friends, right? So like I promised, you get to choose who you want to work on this project with, okay? So in the Google Classroom, you have these Google Slides. Okay, and what you need to do is decide who you want to work with, communicate with them, share it with them. Okay, now what you're going to be doing exactly is each lesson we're going to be talking about a different decade. So the 1980s was first, so you're going to be working on this today and tomorrow. Right? You've got 2 days to work on this, and what you're doing is you're choosing 2 of these events, and you're going to write about them. So event number 1, you put the name here. Event number 2, put the name there. And then you are going to write the date of the event as close as you can get to it. If you can only get the year, that's fine. What is the event about? How did it change the world or that area? And why do you think it's important for students to learn about that? Okay. So you're going to include all that information in here. Now, this is the fun part. This is what everyone loves. Okay. You're going to be looking at what was popular back then. What were some of the most popular movies of the 80s? Popular music. What was fashion like back then? And what were some of the popular TV shows, okay? So if you want to include pictures, that's fine. If you want to embed YouTube videos, that's fine. And I can show you how to do that later on. That's totally cool, right? Pictures are totally fine. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. So you're going to be doing the 1980s today, share it with somebody, and then make sure you put both their names here so I know whose papers I'm grading. Okay, so if you need to reach out to me, you know how to get in touch with me, jvians@wcpss.net, and I'll see you guys later.